This is a continuation of Bill's behaviors towards me, according to a chronology. In 1992, I was 5 years old, and I got my first bicycle. And Bill was very dismissive of this, and to the point that most people who watched it felt it was emotional abuse. He was almost, I can't even find the word for it, nonchalant about it. A woman named Patty Steele from our church was there and watched the whole thing, and she felt that it was very abusive towards me, that his behavior towards me was totally wrong. He did not care. He did not notice. He was almost irritated that I was trying to show him my new bike. And it was my first bike. During that year, I was 5 years old, 1992, Bill brought somebody to visit who was supposed to be a potential witness for him in court. She was working on a psychology or psychiatry degree, I don't remember which, and it was pretty clear that she disapproved of his behavior towards me and felt that something was terribly wrong in the relationship. This became very evident when Bill wanted to play Mother May I. And anyone who is familiar with this game, someone stands behind a line and gives out orders to the people to make them go forward or backwards, closer or farther away from the line, and whoever gets beyond the line first wins. Well, basically, Bill was playing to win. He didn't care how he hurt my feelings, and he was not doing this constructively. When he was given a turn, he was allowed to take 2 steps according to the person behind the line, which was the person training in psychology or something. And he took 2 giant steps, crossed over the line, and starts jumping up and down and running around me saying, I won, you lost, ha 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 ha, I won, you lost, I'm better than you, and all this stuff. And she was really horrified by this behavior, naturally, and I thought it was normal because this is always how Bill treated me. So when he wanted to play Mother May I again so he could win again, she said, no, let's play something else, and he said, no, we've got to play the same game again because I win this game. And I just said, well, I'll play whatever Bill wants, I don't care. And then she kept trying to bring me inside to play a different game, and in the end I don't know what ended up happening, whether I don't remember that very well because I was getting traumatized by the whole thing. But Bill refused to stop jumping up and down and running around in circles around everyone, repeating to me that he'd won and I'd lost. To tell me that he'd won is one thing and to be excited about that, but when you tell other people they've lost, there's a certain derogatory sense that you get in that kind of behavior. And for a 5-year-old child who, I might add, I think had just turned 5, that's a lot to handle. Okay. So, when I turned 6 years old, 1993, Bill bribed me with toys in order to get me to visit with him. In January of 1993, Bill walked away from at least 2 visits because I wanted to bring friends. Bill, however, brought his friends all the time. February 1993, I was angry and irritated with Bill for a whole day due to his skipping around me and sing-songing, chanting at me that it wasn't my choice whether I could visit or not that day, but that it was his choice and that I had to visit like it or not. I viewed this as immature behavior, to say the least. The court had given him the right to choose whether visitation took place instead of me, so that's what that was about, and he spent the entire visit, instead of visiting with me, sing-songing and dancing around me. Very disturbing. Okay. Also, February 1993, he induced me to sit on his lap while in front of the referee by refusing to show me pictures from a book unless I did. I was so angry at his deceit that I jumped off his lap, and rather than kiss him as he wanted, I spat on him instead. Yet somehow, in the court record, it ended up written down that I had kissed him. And that was not true. I spat on him. So, that was disturbing. In June of 1993, Bill made me go home barefoot one time for some unknown reason. I refused to wear the shoes he had bought me, but upon seeing this, he still refused to return the others. So that was really confusing. I liked my shoes that he took from me, and I never got them back. They were play shoes of mine, and I really, really liked them, and they were my favorite. So, God only knows what his problem was that time. Summer of 1993, Bill stopped by his apartment on one of his visits. He and Lynn frightened me by informing me that one of the rooms there would be mine. To my mind, this fulfilled what he'd screamed earlier in my life about the idea that I'd be forced to live with him whether I liked it or not. Winter of 1993, my mother was forced to call the police because Bill kept on trying to come upstairs to drag me from my room after I had locked myself up there to get away from him. He was becoming very, very, very violent. And typically enough, his new wife Lynn was shocked when someone said, "Well, Peggy, I guess it's your turn to call the police." She thinks that's unusual and didn't understand that Bill was always calling the police because he tried to act differently around her than he did around other people. However, the longer she was married to him, the more he started to expose of himself. So who knows what happens with them. That's their problem, not mine. So that's 6 years old. Also, at 6 years old in 1993, Bill went in and took one of my doctor's appointments. He went in for whatever reason he wanted. I think it was for something of his physical problems, and he took my appointment, and it was charged to my mom, and so I didn't get my leg problem, my leg cavities, which was very serious. I didn't get a doctor's appointment because of that, and that was necessary for me to come constantly for that, to see what was going on medically. So that was bad. The other thing that happened at 6 years old was I painted a beautiful butterfly picture at school in art class, and I was angry with Bill and accidentally let it slip that I had made a butterfly picture at school and that it's none of his business and I don't want him to see it. He rarely went to my school unless to convince my teachers that my mom was evil. So after I told him I didn't want him to see this, he raced to the school, and the first thing he did was got a good look at it, and the next time I had a visit with him, he started describing it to me and telling me that he'd seen it, he'd seen it, he'd seen it. So it was emotional abuse that he was trying to do to me. He was trying to traumatize me again. It's pretty obvious. At 7 years old, 1994, often my mom and I sat at McDonald's waiting for him to come visit, but he wouldn't come. Bill wasted so much of my time that my Sunday school actually failed me, which is incredible because most people consider me more knowledgeable in theology than the average Joe on the street. I'm not saying I'm a genius or anything, but I will say that this was incredible to anyone who knows me. Summer of 1994, Bill and Lynn and other people take pictures of me playing and of Bill jumping into camera range at the last minute, as if he'd been playing with me all along. Also telling me to close my eyes and smile while looking at the sky. I was told that I had to let Bill sit behind me while the pictures were taken, and that I had to bend my head against his chest. A lot of times with these kinds of things I was threatened that I wasn't allowed to go home if I didn't cooperate, which really scared me a lot. 1994, 7 years old still. I wasn't permitted to go home from McDonald's, so I hid in the play tubes with the play areas that they have for children and cried. I was so scared and sad that I wet myself. Later that day, I was forbidden to change in the bathrooms, even though I was 7 years of age. I demanded to be changed in the bathrooms, but was refused. And in the end, Bill ended up being the one to change my underwear for me. I wasn't even allowed to change myself. I was told that I wouldn't be allowed to go home if I didn't let him do it, and they insisted that I lie on my back like a baby in the middle of the play area in front of everyone and let Bill take my underwear off and put it on again. And he gave this happy smile, like he was just loving the whole thing, and nobody seemed to care or consider this sexually inappropriate. I don't understand why at 7 years old, when I had been potty trained since the age of, God, very young, like 1 year old latest, I was early in potty training, and he's supposed to change me at 7 years old when I was perfectly capable of going to the bathroom by myself. Everyone knew I was potty trained. And making me lie down on my back so that he could get a better view, I'm sorry, that was disgusting. Okay, so that's what he did at 7 years old there. I have more. Summer of 1994, I was forced to stay at the police station when I expressly asked to go home. The supervisor and Bill refused to let me leave. That really scared me. Even though I was at the police station for the visits during that period of time, I still felt very threatened by Bill and the supervisor controlling where I was allowed to be and where I wasn't allowed to be, despite court orders saying that I had the right to choose whether I visited or not. In fall of 1994, Bill invented a game of let's see if I can catch Bethany, which scared me in some ways as it didn't feel like a game. This led to me being separated from the supervisor for a while, which frightened me more, and I ended up wetting my underwear. Fall of 1994. Bill frightened me by trespassing onto my grandparents' property and attempting to entice me to come down to him by waving his arms while jumping up and down. I viewed that as psychotic. November 1994. Bill visibly enjoyed it when Mom was court-ordered to call him Daddy Bill. He didn't ask her why she did so, nor ask her to stop, but rather smiled and kept on trying to make her say it. I viewed this as insane behavior, which in no way encouraged me to want to be around him, nor to call him Daddy for that matter. I mean, he wasn't her daddy, so it was a bit traumatic to hear her say that. It really seemed crazy. But I just figured it was another court order, because my mom always acted crazy only when court orders came in like that. Lynn, his new wife, told me when I was trying to kick him away from me and hit him away from me when he wouldn't leave me alone and was chasing me around and being very aggressive towards me, that I could go to jail and the police would come and get me if I did that again. That it's against the law and she'd call the police and they'd come and get me. I was very scared by this. A supervisor who was there witnessed it, and when I got home, told my mom and grandparents that Lynn should go to jail for trying to emotionally abuse me and traumatize me to the degree that she felt she did. She felt it was emotional abuse what Lynn was doing and saying that day, and that it was wrong. Bill approved of the whole thing, too. Made it sound like the police were coming to get me, like it was the Gestapo or something like that. It was really creepy. One time, I decided I'd get revenge on Bill for his behavior, so I pickpocketed him in front of everybody. And I thought this was very funny because I didn't like Bill and I didn't like his behavior towards me. And Bill approved of it, just so that everyone else would approve of him. And this was not moral behavior. If I had tried to kill somebody, frankly, I think he would have approved just to get the approval of everyone else in the room. He never cared about my psychological stance towards the world on a moral sense, and it was very disappointing. My grandmother, who was very religious and a very good and holy woman, I got home and I told her, she saw me pulling change out of my pocket, and she said, "Where did you get that money?" And I said, "I pickpocketed it from Bill. It's my prize." Because that's how I felt. The impression Bill gave me was it was my prize. And she had a long talk to me about what's moral and what isn't, and had me return the money. But that's just to show how little Bill cared about morality and the effects that these things were having on me. Another visit happened where I realized just how unimportant I was for Bill and how little he wanted to have a relationship with me or see me. I told him at the beginning of the visit that he had an exact number, I think it was 10 or something like that, of chances to behave well. And every time he acted disgustingly towards me or said something rude, I would take away a chance, and at the end I would go home and stop the visit. He intentionally, in 5 minutes' time, said exactly 10 rude things so that I would count down and go home. This did not seem like a father who wanted to be with me and visit me and really loved me. I thought this was very, very disturbing, and I realized after that he did not want to have a relationship with me, and he didn't care about me. I was just a pawn. So that was very, very sad and emotionally abusive. One morning I woke up, another instance of Bill's behavior that was frightening towards me and wrecked up my school day, is my mom woke up and all 4 of her tires had been slashed. This is just after Bill found out where my mom lived and her address. Curiously, after Bill got info like this, things like this would start to happen. All 4 of her tires had been slashed, so I had to find another way to get to school. It was quite a pain. Really disturbing. So, that was 7 years old, 8 years old, 1995. Often my mom and I sat waiting for Bill to show up for visits at the McDonald's, but he wouldn't come. In April of 1995, Bill told the supervisor fictitious stories about not seeing me for years. Tried to say that my mom was forbidding him visits and that he hadn't seen me for years as a consequence, even though he'd only seen me just the week before with a different supervisor. So that was ridiculous. April 1995. On the same day as I was thrown in the car during one of these visits, Bill grabbed the phone from me while I was calling home to ask for someone to come and bring me home. Bill happily informed me that if I didn't say that I wanted to stay and that I was having a good time, that he would hang up the phone so I wouldn't be able to speak anymore. On April 1995, Bill and the supervisor, Kelly, one picking me up by my legs and the other by my arms, dragged me in that position over to the car and threw me into Kelly's car to make me visit with Bill. Bill then wrenched my hands and arms behind me around the car seat so that I wouldn't be able to jump out of the moving car rather than try some other method to calm me down. It was very, very painful. My arms at that age are short, and I would have them yanked around like this, like having my hands tied behind my head almost, by Bill in the back seat while this happened. I didn't think this was normal. Spring 1995. Bill and Lynn terrified me by riding by my babysitter's house while wearing sunglasses and waving at me. They must have had me followed to the babysitter's. How else would they know where the babysitter was? I don't like to be stalked, and I don't think at that age, at 8 years old, anyone would appreciate it either. It's very traumatic for a young child. Bill's continual and general behavior towards me. He generally treated me as though I were younger than my actual age, and was generally disrespectful of my wishes and needs. He was constantly yelling and swearing. Because we had to be there for visits whether he came or not, we rarely ever went on vacation, and I missed birthday parties and invitations from my friends all the time, to the point where they stopped inviting me. Bill was always giving me Christmas presents in the summer, etc., in front of supervisors while loudly saying that Mom wouldn't let him give them to me on visits. This was false, and to impress upon the supervisors that he was a good father and that my mom was a bad mother. He was constantly opening and reading poetic letters to me in front of supervisors, but didn't send me any letters at any other time of the year. He was constantly tape recording me, trying to get me to repeat lies into a tape recorder. He'd have it in his pocket sometimes he'd even pull it out. He tried to make it into a game in which I was to use my very photographic memory to repeat whole speeches he would feed to me. He brought me to child play parks and tried to get me to play games I liked. This was for the purpose of making me happy so he could set up fake photos that gave the illusion that I was happy because of him or that I loved him. The reality was that I'd be having a blast with the games I was playing, and he'd join in only when a photo was being taken. The interaction with me was for the sole purpose of getting set up photos. It became very clear after a while. He refused to speak to Mom directly, always trying to get me to send her messages. He was constantly trying to convince me that my mom didn't love me and that she actively hated me. He constantly asked me to go to Mom and tell her that I hated her and that she didn't love me, constantly asking me to repeat after him when he'd say that Mom was refusing visits. He was constantly trying to get me out of the supervisor's earshot in order to tape me and get me to repeat things. He'd also used this tactic to insult me behind their backs. He would hurt me by cuffing and covering my ears when he'd curse at my mom. He did this in order to prove to people what a great father he supposedly was by not letting me hear curse words. He would cover my mouth with his hand when I would try to tell people about his different abuses towards me. He laughed when he'd do it and try to convince people it was a joke. He used to do it so hard that he'd leave hand imprints across my face, and I'd be covered in drool and spit from trying to yell at him to stop. When I got older, I tried to bite him for this, so he started cupping his hand so I couldn't bite him. He constantly hovered over me and chased me everywhere I went, because he knew I didn't like this. I would scream, kick, hit, and bite at him to keep him away from me. Even with these wild behaviors, he refused to leave me be. He was constantly verbally aggressive in ways supervisors couldn't understand. For example, after he called me ugly, he started pointing at everything except me to call it beautiful. It hurt me intensely to think that he felt that rocks and dirt were beautiful after he'd called me ugly. I've had major problems looking at myself in mirrors since then. I've tried to get over it, but still have big problems. Another example of this verbal harassment was caught on tape at a session with Dr. Roger Fisher. Bill began to obsessively whistle after I told him I wanted silence. When I'd shout at Bill for these behaviors, I was reprimanded by ignorant supervisors for being abusive towards Bill. Bill embarrassed many of his potential court witnesses and made me afraid of going to the bathroom because he'd scream at Mom and me every time I had to urinate, and Mom brought me to the bathroom.